Wonderful. Thank you, Lundy. And then just to add on to that from my own experience, a critical aspect is, and I would presume obviously Yolandi, you maybe prepared a few slides as well, just to handle that presentation component. And that is certainly something that people struggle with a little bit, because you've again got to lift up quite a significant amount of detail to a level of a sort of an executive summary of what your research is all about, and take people through a little bit of a journey in a very short space of time without giving them too much information, but giving them the comfort that you know exactly what your problem statement is. You've zoned in on your topic. You've done enough literature review. There's a high degree of success, and that's also what the institution is interested in seeing, is whether they approve your research proposal, whether you're actually then going to be quite successful. I think it's more than 50% of people drop out of postgraduate level research degrees, and universities rely very highly on funding for their operations through the number of successful research degrees that they manage to achieve. So the university is very interested in making sure that you're successful, but the checkpoint for them is at that research proposal stage, so that they can approve you with some level of comfort that you will be successful. I just want to, Siwe mentioned, I love how the EndNote referencing works, and maybe just to touch on that very quickly. Unfortunately, it isn't free. You will have to pay for it. But very much like Yolandi, I was messing around with PDFs on my laptop in different folders for my research proposal, and I only figured out EndNote and got good at referencing when I did my final report. So what I teach in the course is to learn from my bad experience and the way that I didn't do it, and almost start as early as you can in your research degree by getting disciplined about having a referencing system, and then linking that in with whatever tool you're using to actually write your documents. And that will save you hours and hours and hours and hours of time, and almost get to the point where you are enjoying referencing and the importance of bringing the literature into your own writing and seeing how that supports the contribution that you're making. And Siwe says they're worth paying for. I did interview the head of the convocation, Stacey Lee Bolon, on the podcast. So she's on the WITS senior council, and I asked her, I said, why doesn't WITS just fund EndNote licenses for students? WITS does fund Zotero, which is a cloud-based referencing system, which I don't know too well, but presumably would give you the same advantages. Okay, Yolandi, now let's just talk a little bit. You mentioned you wrote a document and you had a little bit of a literature review in there. Just talk about your impressions of when we spoke 6 months ago to what that document actually ended up looking like, and imagining people that are going into that process. Tips and ideas. So you spoke about getting good at Word. We spoke about referencing. You spoke about the importance of bouncing ideas off of somebody. But the actual writing of the document, in support of that process, tips and ideas on that process?
Yes, so yeah, there's a few things that we cover. So you cover the background, and then you've got your problem statement, your aim, and then you've got your methodologies, your verification, validation. My specific PhD, we're going to break up in articles. Guys, there's pros and cons to that, but we're going to attempt that to articles. So for me, it's more components and it's more manageable. So I've got sort of end goals for each one. I have to have a clear problem statement. It needs to link into each other. And it's almost like an input process output. The output of the one goes into the problem statement of the other one. But as I mentioned, that problem statement, because when I had that problem statement clear and defined, I can pull it actually back where I could pull it back into my background because I elaborated on that. And Ronette told me in that problem statement, there's a few keywords. I had innovations, continuous improvement, banking, developing countries. So I had to go and get literature review on all of those. And I had to go and identify the need, because when you go through the background, it needs to sort of then flow into your problem statement again. I've got this background. I see it's important to have it. This has been successful. Why is the need there? And that it flows into my problem statement. So this, and then the next, and then that flows into my objective statement again and my aim. So in that document, everything flows, and you need to make sure. Something I personally struggled with, and Peter, I don't know if you have a course on this one, but it's a bit of storytelling as well. Now, as you also being an engineer, I wanted to do bullet points, and I can't do bullet points. So this thing needs to flow. It needs to have a story. And I think for some engineers, maybe that might be challenging to actually write that. So that portion, although my project proposal has been approved, Renee told me, we're not done there yet. You need to go back. I've got a lot of loose standing items. So I did a lot of reading, had some books, I did some journals, and I've got loose standing components. But how do I let this thing flow and put it in a nice format? I'm not a good writer. I love presenting. I'll do this every day, but I'm not a good writer. So how do I get support there? Do I get somebody to assist me there? Or how do I do this? How do I, because I need to write, I struggled with a 10-page document. It took me 6 months. How I'm going to write how big is your proposal? How big was your final document? Pages? 200?
It was quite extensive, actually. I wrote probably too much, to be honest. And maybe just on that point, Yolandi, is that in the research proposals course, you'll actually get my research proposal document and my presentation slides. So you can actually have a look at what I did in my research proposal as well. So both my presentation and my actual document is in there. But Yolandi, it was probably unnecessarily long. So,
So I just thought it was.
I actually wrote two because what they said was, okay, that's fantastic, but we want like a summary version of it. So I actually wrote the very long one and then the high level one. But Yolandi, just the point worth making, and I touch on this in my course about how to be successful in your final report. I never regretted doing the extra work on my research proposal, because a lot of that work I then reused and repurposed in my final report, and it laid the groundwork. When I came back to writing that final report 3.5 years later, I had this very extensive research proposal document, and it was so good to be able to go and, obviously move things around and change things quite a lot, but it just reduced the amount of actual writing and words that I had to create for my final report. So that's just one thing that I do teach in the courses, is put a lot of effort into your research proposal, because you'll never regret that. It'll always be useful for throughout your study, and especially your final report.
Yes, and I know when I did my master's, this was a lot of years ago, so I'm not sure if things probably changed. Like I said, we did not have EndNote at that time, so I'm very grateful for EndNote now. But also support on the document itself. So for those that's not, English is not my first language. So you've got the research, which is challenging, and then you've got the writing component, which is challenging. So I'm not sure if you've got any guidance. I'll throw it back to you, Pete. Now I'm boomeranging it. Do you have any advice on that while we were at these discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a course on how to double your academic writing quality. So in that course, I teach just good practices around sentence construction and developing well-structured paragraphs, and those really are the building blocks of whatever academic writing project you're working on. So there's some value there for people just to get their thoughts right, because when you write, you have to think like a reader, and a reader is going to either be exhausted by poor writing, or they're going to be energized by something that's well written and tells the story exactly as you have said, Yolandi, and takes them on that journey with that golden thread. And your supervisors will be the main audience for your research proposal, and then your examiners for your final report. So the quality of writing is very important. That would be one piece of advice, and I'll put a link to the course just now. The other piece of advice, Yolandi, is to get an editor. Get a professional editor to help you. If English is not your first language, I had 2 editors for my final report, and the one was very strong on semicolons and commas and grammar, and the other one was a little bit more stronger on some of the academic turns of phrase that I was using. And I valued all the edits that both of them made. And I'll go and look for the webinar. We had an interview with Anneleen Creel, I think it was. I forget the name exactly, but she offers a professional editing service, and she's available inside the Facebook group. And in fact, in that webinar, we ran a promotion where she was going to then provide, I think, 10 people 1 hour's free editing services. So the link to the Facebook group, if you join that up, come into the group and you'll see access to her and her services. So those would be the 2. And maybe a third piece of advice, Yolandi, which I have a lot of videos on in the YouTube channel, which you guys can also subscribe to. I put the link there as well, is write early. Write often. And when I say write early, it's not just early in the day. My pattern was to stop in a coffee shop on the way to work and get 45 minutes of writing done before I started my day. But write early in the deadline that you're working towards. So now Yolanda's been talking about this article that she has to write. And Yolanda, I'd love to just spend 5 minutes on what you talked about just now, a thesis by publication. So we'll just pause on that for a second just now as well. But my advice to Yolanda would be to start the generative writing process as early as possible. So just don't judge your writing. Just write bullet points, write mind maps, write sticky notes, write continuously. Even if you don't know what to write, I don't know what to write. And eventually the brain starts to unlock. And the brain is going to have all these wonderful thoughts in it. But until your brain connects with your fingers or your keyboard, you're not going to get those thoughts down onto paper or onto your document. So the practice of writing often also helps unlock that, because if you get into a daily discipline of writing, then when you sit down to write, it doesn't feel difficult. If you don't brush your teeth, you don't get good at brushing your teeth. If you don't drive every day, I mean, like many of us didn't drive for 3 months, and then suddenly we get in a car, when the lockdowns lifted and we've forgotten how to drive, right? So, write early in the process. I like to write early in the day, and then write as often as you can. And that generative writing, no one has to see that. You will eventually edit that and improve that to something that people will review. But you have to start with that generative writing process. And especially when you look at a thing like a topic development or developing a problem statement, start with that generative writing process. Mind map it, or just creative writing. Share it with your mentor or somebody that you trust that can give you some input on it.